Hi everyone. I'm the director for our New Zealand NGO Common Knowledge Trust, and we're putting on a scheduled live Facebook COVID-19 Quick Birth Skills online course. Now we are a not-for-profit, and yes, we are attaching a link to the course that we've put up, and yes, we are charging for it at $60 with a 20% discount because our NGO exists because we sell the skills that hundreds of moms and dads developed. But it's a not-for-profit, so I don't make the money. Our trust is able to make certain that I can continue after 50 years to try to provide a message to all of us that we need to grow a self-learning, skilled birthing population. So I want to talk to you today about the body skills in birthing better. So excuse me, I've got to rub my eye here. When these skills start to develop in the early 70s, as I've said in other videos, and I'll say again, there was a 4.5% cesarean rate in the United States, to which people in the natural birth movement go, see, 95% of women can give birth vaginally. However, they forget what the reality is when there is no medical care or little medical care or medical care that is not particularly sophisticated. And that is that 95% of those women labored for hours or days. They suffered in childbirth because they often lacked skills. And when labor goes on and on and on and on, it's overwhelming. You feel out of control. And if there were problems at a birth, the medical profession didn't have any way to step in. They knew problems existed. So when we hear people say, yes, without medical care, women died in childbirth, it's not just death that occurs. There are many, many issues that are risks, and there are many issues that are problems. Now, this is not a pro-medical conversation. What this is an understanding who is doing the birth, and that is women. 100% of pregnant women will give birth. It's guaranteed. The only way out of pregnancy is if we do the birth. And the question is what are the words that we're using about birth? So you often hear women say, I'm giving birth. What's the verb giving mean? Or the comment, which is true around the world, always has been, there's no way to know what your birth's going to be like. And in fact, once we get pregnant, we never feel in control. So if we don't know what our birth's like and we don't feel in control, then we just feel birth happens to us. And birth happens to us if we know nothing. Pregnancy will end with birth, one way or another. And so we're using these verbs. It happens. It's an event. Well, if it's an event, what are we doing? Are we standing there? Are we sitting there? Is birth just happening to us? Is it just something we have no control over? We're all faced with these. And in the 60s, the 70s, my generation of people grew up with the very, very first childbirth preparation classes and also with the first set of skills that could be universally used. No, those skills weren't great. Lama's breathing was crazy, and we'll talk about that tomorrow. And Bradley was too variable. So we'll talk about that tomorrow too. But when Birthing Better mothers and fathers started to develop the skills, the first skills we developed were how to cope and manage, work through, deal with, handle, stay on top of, and feel in control of the natural occurring labor pains. But what we found was we still had those long first and second stages. And so we had to go back and talk about, well, what was happening? And this is where fathers were so vitally important to this, and why you need to understand that our NGO markets to pregnant women to target fathers, because men are human beings and they want to be skilled. And if they're not skilled to help us prepare our body for birth and help us as a birth coach, then the fact is they are less secure about how to move into parenting. And as a human being, that's not okay. So, as I said in the beginning of this, there is no order to these skills. And today I'm going to talk about the body skills, because once we start to realize that coping with labor still left many of us with long first and second stages, we had to go back and say, what's happening? And men were really clear about it. It's an object in a container, and somehow you have to open up that container to let that object out. So how do you open up the container? What do you do? When do you do it? Why do you do it? And how can you do it? And that's what we're going to talk about today, is our body. Babies grow inside our body. None of them grow inside our head or at the tips of our fingers. So rarely does a baby grow outside the uterus. So around the world today and around the world throughout time, a baby has grown inside a woman's body. Now, modern women know more about our bodies than traditional women. How do I know that? I've spent many, many years in traditional communities not involved in birth, but women don't know they have a cervix. Where would we know that without medical care or science? Why would we know that? Why would we know that a cervix dilates? We wouldn't know that. A lot of modern women don't know that. If we're 5 centimeters dilated, what does that mean to any of us? We don't know what that means. And we need to know what that means, not intellectually, but we need to know what it means in our body. So we're going to talk about the body today as we learned it. And as men, the fathers who developed birthing better helped understand this. We share the same body with men. We might not like that thought, but we all blink, we all cough, we can all tighten up our rectum. That gives us a huge advantage. That means we can share a common knowledge set of body skills. And why is that so important? Because pregnancy is such a body function. Birth is such a body function. We give birth, it's an event, it happens to us. But more importantly, we do the activity of birthing. And do is a weak verb, but at least it implies we have to do something. And that's where skills matter. So we have a chance to prepare our body for birth. We start at around 24 weeks, but if you're 42 weeks plus and you're going, my God, too late. No, it's better to start to know your body so that you understand how it can create space for your baby. This is not rocket science. You don't need to know anatomy and physiology. The videos are very clear. First of all, do them on your partner. As a woman birthing, do them on your birth coach. Because when they feel in their body how you can create space in their body, they can help you more easily create space in your body. Because we have often grown up in a belief that men are from Mars, women are from Venus, men and women don't understand each other, men don't understand women's bodies, but we're the same. So 99% of us is the same. So we have to understand the importance of that. So what fathers discovered and why it's important to include men in the conversation about childbirth is that men are now, most of us are living in nuclear families. So it is our father or the father or another person who's going to help us prepare. So we have a bony pelvis, and most of us think the pelvis is one piece. Most of us have no idea that it's 4 bones and that in the middle here is a cartilage of the pubic bone. It's not 1 bone. It's 2 bones. This side over here is part of the pubic bone, and that rises up into our hip bone, and then it swings back, and there's a bump that's overlaying our sacrum, which is the triangular bone at the end of the spine, and the bone that I'm sitting on, or you're sitting on, the sit bone. So that whole hip bone makes 2 of the 4 bones. The third bone is the sacrum, and the fourth bone is the tailbone. So we need to know what this hard structure is like because our baby needs to come through it. So one of the things, and there was no order to how we developed it, we just started to focus on preparing the body. So I'm going to give you some order to this because we had to start to make sense out of what we were learning. First of all, because the baby has to come down through this bony structure, we had to map it. We had to know what the space was that our baby could move through. The baby's a big object, as Father so clearly said. So if it's a big object, that space has to be big enough for the baby to move through easily. So we often had long first stages or second stages because the baby was having trouble moving through the bony structure. So what we did was we mapped the outlet of the pelvis. So the inlet is above the pubic bone. If we put our fingers above the pubic bone, we can't feel that inlet. We can feel if we come up where our hip blades are, but we can't push back to that inlet. So the mid-pelvis, where the pubic bone is, and it wraps around to the sacrum, and the inside of the top of the vagina attaches to that with a cervix in the middle. And that's going to be important. In the next part, I talk about the soft tissue because that's soft tissue. But the outlet is the bones we're sitting on, the pubic arch, and from the sit bones back to the tailbone. So we can map that. I'm not going to lie down now and have you see my crotch. What you're going to do is lie down, and you're going to do this at some point. First of all, you want to measure the distance between the bones you sit on. You don't want to take a tape measure. You want to see if your fist can get between those bones. If the fist can, this is about the size of an average baby's head. So if your baby can fit through those bones, then you have space. Some women have lots of space. Some women it's narrower. It's important for you to know because if we need to create space, we need to know why we're creating space. So the next is we want to feel the pubic arch. So you want to get down there. The vagina is right at the pubic arch, and you want to feel whether the arch is rounded like that and whether you could get 3 fingers in there. Some women have a more narrow pubic arch, and you can get 2 fingers. It's important to know that. Often women with a narrow pubic arch, if you make sense of this, they will have a narrow distance between those sit bones. Then you want to measure, so you've measured the pubic arch, you've measured the space between the sit bones. Now you want to go from the pubic arch back to your tailbone. You want to see whether a fist could fit into that. Then what you want to do is to feel whether your tailbone's a little nib like mine is, or whether for some women it curls under like this and is quite long. Because if the tailbone is long, then as the baby comes through the pelvis, it runs in and sits on that tailbone. And that's why some women feel, I broke my tailbone in birth. So then what you want to do, by measuring the length, measuring the space between the sit bones, measuring the pubic arch, seeing what the tailbone is doing, you then want to find your sacrum, that triangular bone at the base of your spine. I have a flat, fairly wide sacrum, which means the inside part of my pelvis has a flatness to it. Some women have a very curved sacrum, which means that when the baby's coming down, it comes into that pocket of the sacrum. How wide is your sacrum? How long is your sacrum? Is it flat or is it curved? So once you get a tactile picture of your pelvis, and the space in between, you can draw a map of it. My pelvis has a wide pubic arch. I have a distance between my sit bone where I can get my fist between. The distance from the pubic arch to my sit bone, I could get a fist between. And I have a fairly flat sacrum. I have very quick labors. I have what is considered to be a very large open pelvis. In fact, in 1970, when my doctor did an internal, he said to me, "You've got a lot of room in there. You could get a freight train through you." And I thought to myself, "Oh my gosh, what's this guy saying?" But I have a very normal pelvis. About 50% of women have this type of pelvis, and we can get very big babies out of us. It has nothing to do with how tall we are. It is not true that there are childbearing hips. Many, many birthing better families were very petite women, and they had very open pelvises. Unless you map your pelvis, you do not know. Full stop. So map your pelvis. Now, if you have a narrow pubic arch and the space between your sit bone is narrow, you will probably be very long front pubic arch to tailbone. This means you need to give your baby space behind your sit bone to your sacrum to come down and turn around the corner here. Number of women have that. They birth fine. They have to know what their sacrum is like, and often they have quite a short sacrum and sometimes a curved sacrum. So they need to pay more attention to how to create space in their sacrum and how to create space between the sit bones to have more side to side space. In all of the years, so I have to tell you something which I know some of you are going to go, I don't, too much information. Because part of the body work is working on the inside of the birth canal and softening the tissue, all of the tissue inside the birth canal, not just the perineal massage, all of that tissue. We can feel that inside part of the pelvis. Remember, we cannot feel the inlet. We can never feel the inlet. But when you go inside, where the top of the vagina and the cervix is, you can feel the inside of the bony structure. It is never symmetrical. Never symmetrical. A woman might be flat on one side and on the other side have a slight bulge that's like this. That means the baby will go to where there's the most room. And also, because it's important to know that, then you know what the narrowest part of the pelvis is for the baby to then come down into the outlet. These are important things. They're things that we can learn for ourselves. They're not rocket science. They're not difficult, and you don't have to have anatomy and physiology. Can women feel this themselves? Yes, we can, and we'll talk about that in the internal work at some point. So right now we're talking about the bony pelvis. So what we discovered was we could map the bony pelvis. Then the question is can we create any space in the bony pelvis? Since most of us think the pelvis is one piece, and if you were in traditional communities, they'd certainly think it was one piece, and most of us do, we have no idea. We have this big bone, starts on each side of the pubic bone, goes down to the sit bone, it goes up to the hips, it goes around, and it's that bump on the back of the sacrum, and we think, okay, what do we do with that? So, birthing better families, in the early 80s and the 70s, we developed the skills to cope with labor better, and in the 80s, we started to do the body work. So as I said in the beginning, we're not going through a linear order because there is no order, okay? So we can start anywhere, right? So we're going to start here with the body stuff. So what we found was the hips do move, but we have to do it in a certain way. I cannot show you this by talking to you. You have to be able to take my instructions and translate it on your own body. So have the man or the other person who is going to be at your birth or help you lie down on their side. Put pillows between their knees. You can put pillows under their belly so they're lying directly on their side, not tilted forward, not tilted back, as side on as possible. And you can put a pillow under their arm and a pillow under their head so they're comfy lying on their side. So what you're looking at is the side of their body, their ear, their shoulder, the side of their waist, their hip, the side of their leg, their knee, the side of their ankle. So get that picture. So we're working on the pelvis. So you can sit behind them or in front of them. It's easier to sit behind them. Sit behind them and sit at the level of their hip to the bottom of their butt, because that's where you're going to work with them. You're going to place the hand that is equal to their hip blade on the hip blade, not on their waist, not where their leg is. You've got to put your hand on their hip blade. Now, how do we do this if we don't know where there is? You think we do. We live in our bodies, but we don't often know where there is. Have the person put your hand on top of their hip blade. They will know where it is. So you have one hand on the hip blade, and now have the person reach back and feel where the bone is they sit on, and you put your fingers on the bone they sit on. So you're going to have one hand on the hip blade and one hand on the sit bone. And you're going to be sitting just about where I am in relationship. This is the back of their body, their butt's down there, and their waist is up here. One hand on the hip blade, one hand on the sit bone. So what you're going to do is gently, let me scream the word out, gently. You're going to gently push down on the hip blade, straight down, not forward, not back, not aggressively, and you're going to gently lift the sit bone. That is one bone. You are basically using where the fulcrum of the leg meets the hip, like a seesaw. So the hip blade goes down and the sit bone goes up. And then you hold it there and you say to the person you're doing it on, do you feel there's more space inside? If the person goes, yes, you've got it. You understand it, they understand it. If they go, not certain, just take your hands off, let it go back. Because if it's new, you don't always know right away. Cut yourself some slack, slow down, take a deep breath, don't rush. Assume that if you do this 10,000 times, you're going to be very good. But usually it takes 3 times, maybe 4, for both of you to feel that change. How much change can you feel? For some people, lots. Some people, a little. People who feel lots have a very mobile pelvis, bony pelvis, where there isn't a lot of space. Working with the soft tissue will help later on. But do it again. Your hand is going to be on the hip blade, not on the waist, not where the leg meets the hip. It's going to be on the hip blade. Have the person adjust your hand if necessary. Have them find the bone they sit on, and you replace your hand with them. And then you're going to gently remind yourself of that word, push down and lift up the sit bone, while they pay attention to whether that seesaw motion creates more space down there. How much space are you going to create? Not that much. Maybe that much. Some people that much. Some people it's just that much. Any space is more room. Now, why do we know this? Put your thumb and index finger together. Make it tight. Try to slide that. Can't slide. That's what a stuck baby is like inside your body. So how much space does your baby need? I just want you to soften and relax. I do not want you to lift your finger off the thumb. Just soften and relax so that you can now slide. That's how much space your baby needs. That's not a lot. It just needs a little bit. Okay, so you've done that. You've felt space. Take your hands off. Ask the person lying down to just slightly, okay, remember the word gentle? Remember the word slightly. Slightly tense up down there so you cannot see them do it. Okay, That's slight. And because there is tensions in our body, we don't always, when we tense up, go, ugh. Okay, we just tense up slightly. So have them tense up slightly so you don't see it. And if you do see it, tell them to relax and ask them to tense up slightly so you don't see it. And they will, that you can now. Just slightly tense up down there. It's just a holding. You're tense down there. You haven't clamped up or done anything remarkable. You've just tensed up in there. Have them hold that tension. Now you'll probably find where the hip blade is. Now you'll probably find the sit bone. Now, gently push down on the hip blade. Try to move up. If there's resistance, you're right. They're tense down there. Any tension down there can stop this motion. That's important for you to know. Any tension inside can stop the hip blades from moving and creating space side to side for your baby. Any tension can keep this and prevent that from happening. So now, take your hands off. Say the person you're working on. Soften inside. You can use the word relax. Doesn't matter. Just let go of the tension. Any words you want. And have them just let you know when they've done that. Go back to the hip blade. Go back to the sit bone. And make that motion again with them relaxed. And it will be created again. That's how we create side-to-side motion in our body. And why is that important? If babies get stuck, if our labor goes on and on and on and on, or if the baby is not coming down through the pelvis, we have to assume that we need to create space inside. Some women will tell you, if they're laboring, that the labor has gone on for hours and hours. It's apparent to everybody. A progressive birth is apparent to everybody. It moves along, changes. Within every hour, every 2 hour, contractions get longer, stronger, closer together. A labor that isn't progressive, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours, 6 hours, 7 hours, on and on and on. Those 95% of the women who labored when the cesarean rate was only 4.5%, many of us did that. Hours and hours and hours in non-progressing labors. Medical profession couldn't do anything about it. Cesareans were too major abdominal surgery, so we just labored and labored and labored and labored and labored. And nobody understood it's an exercise in plumbing. Big object has to come out of the container. We have to prepare the container. We have to find ways to create space in the container. It's as simple as that. And that's what Birthing Better families, mothers and fathers alike, did. So when do you use this in birth? Well, if you feel your baby, first of all, do it from 24 weeks on. If you have easy motion, you may never do it again. You don't have to keep practicing it. Your body knows how to do it, right? If you're tight there, then as you work with the soft tissue that we'll talk about, you may increase your mobility. It's increasing mobility. And do it on the other side as well. And after you've done it on your birth coach, have them do it on you. Feel the difference. This is like, wow, it's like fun. And it's like, my God, who'd have thought of this? Well, we did, right? And you now know about it. So you do it if you feel your baby's stuck, or if the baby isn't coming down. And so what you do is you just do it. If you're in the hospital, you don't have to do it when anybody's there. If you're at home, you do it anytime you want. If you're in a birth center, whatever, just do it. We've never had, in the 50 years I've been involved in birth and seen hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of birth professionals, nobody's ever stopped us from doing anything, right? They don't know what we're doing. And they just think nothing we're doing makes any difference until they see a change, if change occurs. So what you do is if you feel your baby is stuck, as soon as you feel your baby is stuck, have your partner just press gently on the hip blade, lift gently with the sit bone, and just hold it either between contractions or in a contraction, it doesn't really matter, and let go. If you feel something change, and often women will feel something change, because if you've gone from this to this, the baby now has space. It's important. And so this is an asterisk, important that after you do the hip lift in labor, that the woman get into a gravity plus position if at all possible, even if that means rolling up the bed so the upper part of her body comes up more. Because gravity does help babies come down, and when you've created more space, that's what you want them to do. So you don't want to create more space and keep a woman on her side. So that's important, asterisk, okay? After you do a hip lift in labor, the woman needs to get up. And here's the next asterisk. Bullet point number 2, wait for 3 contractions. Here's what we learned about these big objects inside our containers. And this is where dads who developed these skills were so instrumental, is simply our positions. Every position or posture, every time we move, walk, sit, stand, lie, if we're in labor, our baby has to adjust to the internal soft tissue inside our body and how our movement has changed it. So it's important to wait for 3 contractions and then see. If things have changed, don't bother to do it again. Wait and see. Let labor continue to progress. Now, I'm doing live things. I'm going to talk. This is going to be an hour long. I'm halfway through it. We're not going to get through all of these skills. We spent years developing these skills. There are lots of them, right? Why are there lots of them? Because men and women nitpicked their births, and we came up with skills that made each of us feel, if I had had that skill, right? If I had only known. So often we don't need all of these skills, yet we don't know which ones we do need. So when people say, oh my God, birthing better has so many skills, yep, it does, because you may need one out of those, 50 skills. But if you haven't familiarized yourselves with them, then you don't have access to them. We've had somebody say to us, we were asked, somebody did a bunch of interviews and our trust wrote and said, interview us. And they said, well, we responded to a survey of what people wanted. Well, let's very honest about it. If people don't know something exists, then they're not going to ask for it. And people don't know that Birthing Better exists, even though we've been online for 20 years. Because it's very hard to find us. We're not Lamaze, we're not Bradley, we're not hypnobirthing. We're not about natural birth. We're about all births. And people are not looking for birth skills, and they're not looking for skills for all births. So people aren't finding us. So with COVID-19 raging around the world and women being told you're not likely to have a birth support with you or only one, my goodness, it's time for us to get out and be very public about it. So in the body skill part of it, you're going to learn the hip lift. You're going to learn how to mobilize the sacrum. You're going to learn how to create more space in your pubic arch. You're going to learn how to mobilize your tailbone. It's very important that you have this available to you and that you can create mobility in whatever position you get in. So we'll talk a little bit about the sacrum. The sacrum is that triangular bone at the base of your spine. The bumps of the hip bone that we've talked about overlay it. The sacrum is the most important bone that your baby can move if it needs more space. That's what's called back labor. The baby is pressing on the sacrum and trying to move it out. It coordinates with the hormones in your body. If a baby is pressing on the sacrum, it can actually change the shape, give your sacrum a bit more of a bulge. Now, let me do a little bit of my rant. Okay, when I gave birth in 1970, we were all lying on our back, feet up on stirrups. The natural birth movement said women should be more upright. Yes, that's true. We want to be more upright. So what they did was put us in a semi-recumbent position where we're sitting down. None of them are body conscious at all. So when we're sitting on our sacrum sitting down, we're blocking that space off. So lying on your back with feet up in stirrups doesn't block the sacrum. It's not gravity, but your pelvis is very, very open. When we sit in a semi-recumbent position, we block off that space. That's why women push until their eyeballs bulge and their veins break. That's why they lift off with both, but then they contract their big butt muscles, which closes the space more. Or they try to lift to the side, to which care providers will often say, get straight again. So we put women, natural birth movement advocates, put women into a compromising position to birth their baby. So, and I'm going to go on with this just a wee bit more. We talked about back labor. Put counter pressure on the sacrum. What does that do now to the space the baby needs? Closes the space, makes a woman feel more comfortable, but it closes the space. So for hours, if you're putting counter pressure on, hours. Now there's something that is press on the hips. Well, if a woman is standing up, it's really hard to create any space down there by pressing on the hips, because when we're standing, we're in a gravity plus position, and all our connective tissues and muscles get activated. We're not amoebas. So it's very hard to create any space down there. And it's exhausting to press like that. Doing a hip lift is not tiring. It's done, it creates a lot of space. So, and the hip lift came long before this. It came long before that. But the natural birth movement took those things on because they're about natural birth. They weren't about all births. And that's always been a problem since the start. So we need to understand that the sacrum, we need to have mobile. Now, one other rag about the natural birth movement is squatting. When you see women squatting, they always have their knees out to the side. Most of us can't squat, period, but they're saying traditional women squat. No, they don't. Most traditional women do not squat. I've lived in a lot of traditional communities. Most traditional women keep their legs in front of them or they tuck them under one side. Okay? Most traditional women do not squat. In those cultures where they do squat, they keep their knees to the front of their body. And this is important to understand because when your knees are in front of the body, the muscles that run from the bones you sit on back to your tailbone and sacrum are expanded and open. So your sacrum has a lot of mobility. When you squat with your knees out to the side, you contract those muscles and it causes your sacrum to become rigid. So women who squat with their knees out there, unless they have a very big space, will often get hung up in labor. Same way with walking. Great idea to walk in labor. However, we contract all the connective tissue that keep us upright. So many women who do not have ample space in their pelvis or tight on the inside of their pelvis end up with a delayed labor because they are walking. We had to understand this, and we did understand it, not for all of you, for each of us. We had to stay open in our body. So, going to the sacrum, there is on the video a lying down sacrum maneuver where you find the spine, put your fingers on the top of the sacrum, and you find each side of the tailbone. And then you gently pull back from the tailbone and push the sacrum in. And if you can create space like that, then the baby will be able to create space. So once again, then have the person slightly tense up. Try it again. You can feel how any tension inside can block that motion. And then have them relax and do it again. But of course, one woman said, I can't feel that, right? So then we had to figure out how more women could feel that rather than saying, well, you're just stupid or you can't feel it. If she can't feel it, she can't feel it. So we have to create it differently. So I happen to know that woman. And so we started to figure out this is why birthing better was a nitpicking. She stood up. She stood with her feet at shoulder length apart, but comfortably, not like a jumping jack. She just didn't keep her feet together. She just kept her feet like that, and she relaxed her sacrum. And so we thought about, well, there's the sacrum. How do you move it? So then she felt that if she tucked her tailbone between her legs, that she would feel that motion. And then if she sort of like pushed the tailbone back, that she would feel that motion. So you can do it sitting down. I'm doing that now. So I'm pushing my sacrum back, and now I'm tucking it under. I'm pushing it back, and if I put my hands on my hip blades, they're not moving very much. So I can just tuck my tail under and push it back, and that's mobilizing the sacrum. So she got it. She used it. We've called it Kate's cat. That was her name. She was great. And of course, years later, we met another woman who didn't even understand that. The tucking the tail under her legs, she didn't get. The pushing the back, she didn't get. But what she did get was, oh, I point my asshole to the floor. Now I try to point my asshole back to the wall. She got it. It doesn't matter how you get it, right? A lot of birthing better is so organic that we end up responding to it like that. Having the ability to mobilize your sacrum means that if you're tucking your tail under, you're creating space in the top part of your pelvis that you cannot, or the inlet you can't reach. If you're then pushing the tailbone back, you're creating space in that narrowest part of the mid-pelvis, and where the baby then comes into the top of the vagina. That's very important, and that's the area. If you push your sacrum back, as I'm doing now, I'm doing it because I'm sitting more upright. But if I were in a semi-recumbent position with my legs, knees up, I would be sitting on my sacrum, and I cannot do that. That is very important for you to understand, and why you need to negotiate with your care providers about this. Do they understand this? Sort of not. However, if you can say to them, I'd like to have one leg down and one leg up if they have those breakaway beds. If you're at home, you can do what you want. If you're at a birth center, maybe you can do what you want. But if you're in a hospital, when I gave birth in the hospital, and in our YouTube playlist about this course, the COVID Quick Birth Skills course, I have, and it's public on YouTube, there is my birth. I gave birth to my youngest child in 1982 in the hospital when he was 8 weeks premature. And they had a breakaway bed in theater. And I positioned myself so that I was sitting on one sit bone on the edge of that bed with my feet down, and one sit bone sort of off the edge of it, so that I had mobility in my pelvis. So we want to now get on to the soft tissue. And it's important to understand the soft tissue. Failure to progress, baby stuck, long first and second stages are the reason there are so many what are called unnecessary cesareans. The medical profession doesn't want you to suffer. They're not wandering around society with a knife in hand trying to cut you open. This is absolutely nonsense. It is consumers, us, who have demanded more increased medical care to prevent risks. And it's very simple. Cesareans used to be major abdominal surgery. We were cut from the pubic bone to the navel, cut the uterus like this, major, major, major. Why did we have the cesareans of today? Because my generation started to wear bikinis. We didn't want to be left with that scar. And we were thinking about wanting to have a vaginal birth after cesarean, which was not as realistic when we had a classical cesarean. So the medical profession responded to our request by developing what's called the bikini cut or the low-lying cesarean, and they made it safer for us to have a VBAC. But they also made it safer to have a cesarean. We didn't want to be unconscious. We wanted to be conscious. They developed spinals. They developed epidurals. So then our fathers could be with us. We didn't want our twins or breeches to have a problem. So they then said, okay, we'll deliver them by cesarean because it's safer for the baby to have us be delivered by cesarean, even though there is some risk to the mothers. The natural birth movement didn't want forceps because some babies were damaged. So now if a baby gets stuck because a woman has a tight crotch, they push a baby back up rather than using forceps. Why are people using forceps? Because women haven't prepared their vaginas. So it all spins up to the fact that dads were right. We have a container, and we have to prepare it to let this big object out. This is an exercise in plumbing. We have to open up. So then we have the soft tissue inside our body. How many of us know about it? None of us, right? Like, for goodness sakes. Okay, so before I said to you, just tighten up a little bit down there. Okay, when you tighten up down there to stop the hip movement, you are tightening where the top of your vagina attaches into the narrowest part of your pelvis. Now, if I ask you to tighten up your rectum, that's a different set of soft tissue. If I ask you to pull your hip bones together, that's a different set of soft tissue. That's what you do when you do the internal work and prepare from 32 weeks onward, 5 minutes a day, not a lot of time, so that you can prepare all this soft tissue so it can open up so your baby can move down and out your body. However, we had to figure out what was one of the other causes for delay in first and second stage, which was a failure to progress, which meant that the cervix wasn't dilating. Now, there's a lot of arguments about whether cervix should dilate 1 centimeter an hour or not. This is crazy talk. That's not the point. The point is that nobody wants a woman to labor for days and days and days like we used to. We want labor to move along. What does move along mean? Well, if a woman has a 3-hour labor, she is usually totally overwhelmed. She feels like she's going to die. Contractions pile up on each other. They hurt like a son of a bitch, and she just is overwhelmed. If a labor goes on more than 15 or 18 hours from a true labor, meaning you're 3 centimeters dilated or your contractions are 3 minutes apart and 1 minute long, when you're actively in labor, if that goes on past 15 or 17 hours, then women get tired. Duh, makes sense. So we have a time frame for what a progressive labor is. But a progressive labor is seen in the contractions. They get longer, stronger, and more intense. Okay, sorry, they get longer, stronger, more intense, and closer together, right? To a certain point, right? So, and that usually occurs every hour or 2 hours. And women can feel it. Any woman who has a progressive labor will tell you she's having a progressive labor. Any woman who's not having a progressive labor will tell you they're not having a progressive labor, because they tell you, I feel like I've been doing this over and over and over again. Right, so we needed to try to figure out how to assist our cervix to dilate. Now, one of the things we discovered as we did this is 30% of us, me included, we have contractions that get longer, stronger, and closer together, but we do not dilate until the very last. And I talk about that in that playlist of the COVID-19 quick course about my birth. I went into labor 8 weeks early. So when I got to the hospital, I had been in labor since that morning. I didn't get into the hospital until that afternoon, into the next morning, in 5 o'clock the next morning. So I had been sort of laboring all day, and I didn't know that. Who thinks, right? But when I got in there, they said to me, well, you're not in labor because your cervix isn't dilated and you haven't really fully effaced. Well, I had them in maybe 2 hours. So I went from my cervix isn't dilated, not fully effaced, to fully dilated and out. So trust me, 30% of us do not dilate until the very last part of labor, but our contractions are progressive. They get longer, stronger, and closer together. So if you have that kind of a labor, you want to tell your care provider, my labor is progressing. Don't worry about the dilation part of it. But women who just get hung up, you have to understand that we really wanted to figure out how to do that, right? You just can't get into a woman's vagina and rip this thing open. So you had to figure out how to do it. So first of all, words are important. People will say, this cervix gets drawn up to dilate. No, it doesn't, right? It gets retracted back into the inside of the bony pelvis. The uterus contracts and it retracts the top of our vagina into the inside of our bony pelvis. It doesn't draw it up. It retracts it back. Well, that was good news, right? Because then we could focus on where the tissue connected, and that is in the middle of your pubic bone. and it goes around to where the top of your legs go into the hip sockets and around to the mid part of your sacrum. That is where the top of your vagina is. And your cervix hangs down your vagina. That's part of uterus. And when you're very pregnant, the lower part of your uterus and top of your vagina, same thing. Same thing. Maybe different layers, who knows? Same thing. So the contractions occur, Braxton Hicks. It retracts it back. You begin to thin. The tissue isn't soft and puffy anymore. The cervix isn't an inch long. It begins to be retracted back. And then at a certain point, those Braxton Hicks contractions become labor contractions. They become effective, whatever that means. And at some point, they draw the cervix and pull it back, all of it, all the way to the back, all the way to the sides, all the way to front. But we can only feel the front. If we're lying down in an internal, they're trying to feel the back of the cervix. Why? Who knows? So with the internal work on the audio, you'll learn how to check inside, because if things change, if you feel, I don't know where I am, I don't know what's going on, as soon as you check in there, you have this reflex called the asshole to the brain. And when you check in there, you will feel, if you can feel where the cervix is, you can feel an arc. You don't have to say that's 4 centimeters, that's 6 centimeters. If it's fully dilated, it's then back into the pubic bone. But once you feel change in there, you know why things are changing with the sensations you have. So when we dealt with this top of the vagina thing and the bottom of the uterus thing and the cervix in the middle, and understood that the contractions retracted this tight muscle. I used to call it a muscle, and then I got a bunch of midwives ragging on me. It's not a muscle. And I'm going, well, what is it? So I looked up 50% of the cells in your cervix are muscle cells. The other 50% are connective tissue cells. Connective tissue, muscles are part of connective tissues. They may look slightly different, but it's not a bone, right? So you have the ability, as humans, we have the ability, just like you did with a hip lift, to soften that tissue. So we came up with what's called the pelvic lock. And we also have a cervical clock relaxation. So what we found was, first of all, that the word relax is not a word you can use for women in labor. If you say to a woman who's in labor and she looks like she's having problems, relax, she'll go, shut up, you try, I'm trying. That's not a good word. But we found soften is a good word. But women didn't have to soften their shoulders. Babies aren't coming out their shoulders. They just have to soften in their pelvis. But they have to know where to soften in the pelvis. And men can feel this. We can all feel this. So let me tell you where. Soften inside your right hip. Soften inside your sacrum. Soften inside your left hip. Soften in your lower belly and inside your pubic bone. So you've done that. Now, why do we pause? Because our body has to think and act. So let me tell you it at a faster clip. Soften inside your right hip. Soften inside your sacrum. Soften inside your left hip. Soften inside your pubic bone. We can't do that. So we pause. How do I know when to pause? Because I am doing it in my body alongside you. You see, we're all human beings. We all have the same body, men and women. 76-year-old women talking to whoever's listening to this. Okay, that's the pelvic lock. When do we do it? Well, practice it from 37 weeks onward and not before. Okay, because 37 weeks onward, your Braxton Hicks contractions are beginning to thin out that lower part. And if you have your baby at 38 weeks, it's not considered premature, because 80% of women have babies 2 weeks either side of their due date. And before they could figure out due dates, nobody knew when they were going to have their baby. But wait until 37, 38 weeks and then practice. When do you practice? Practice while you're having a Braxton Hicks contraction. Why not? Practice when you're sitting in the car, washing your dishes, taking care of your kids. Men practice as well, because you as men need to know how to do it in yourself, so you can say to the woman, soften in your right hip, and then do it yourself and pause before you go through. So you want to do that often in between contractions, because that prepares your body to respond when a contraction occurs. I did it, and every time a contraction came, all I could think of to myself was, why did I do that? Because my contractions were so intense and they hurt. And I did not want to waste another moment in labor. So I was willing to do it, and I knew it was important to do it. So we are almost getting to the hour mark. Let's talk about cervix. The cervix, the ring of the cervix, like the ring of the vagina, can be very tight. That's why you do a lot of internal work, 5 minutes a day from 32 weeks onward. The cervix can be quite tight with some women. So imagine it as the middle of a clock, and that outside pelvic lock as the face of the clock. That cervix has to be retracted out there. So imagine that face. Your pubic bone is 12 o'clock, one hip's 3, your sacrum is 6, and the other hip is 9. So just soften at 12 o'clock. And do not do this before 37 weeks. Stop it. Don't. Right? If you're pregnant now and you're not 37 weeks, just wrap that up in here. Don't do it in your body, because you don't want your cervix opening. Okay? And you don't want to be relaxing it. Okay? So just soften at 12, soften at your 3, soften at 6, soften at 9. So, and you can soften at 2 or 1 or 4 or 5. Soften that ring. Our body is responsive to our mind. That's why we are coupling our mind to our body. When the natural birth movement is telling women to be instinctive, it's crazy. It always has been, because women avoid pain. We all do. So a woman who's having a progressive labor and she does not have skills will often get on her hands and knees. The labor will back off. She'll get relief, and the labor will linger because she instinctively reacted to pain rather than have the skills to know how to respond. It is important to know that when you do these things, your labor becomes more progressive. And what happens when you have a more progressive labor? Your contractions get longer, stronger, and closer together. And that's why Birthing Better families at the beginning, from the 70s, the 80s, developed the skills to cope with labor, because it can hurt. You can use the word rush, you can use the word wave, you can use the word anything you want. Labor pains can hurt, and they can hurt very big time. And if we don't have skills, we get overwhelmed. So tomorrow we're going to talk about breathing, because breathing was the first universal skills through Lamaze and the Bradley method. It's very important with hypnobirthing and with calm birthing and birthing within. Often those breathing techniques are not adaptable, adjustable, or sustainable. First of all, they're focused on only natural birth and not every birth. 100% of pregnant women give birth, so we all should have skills to actively do the activity of birthing our baby. That's first of all. Second of all, we have to be able to have skills that we understand why we're using them and how to sensitively adjust them at any moment. Where do we have this experience in life? Driving a car, right? We learn multiple skills to drive a car, and society expects us at a 97% expectation that we adapt and adjust those skills at every single moment of the time we're behind the wheel of the car. Birth is an activity like driving. Yes, it's physiological. We'll discuss that at another time. Same. Activity, activity, activity. You want the right skills to do that activity. Birthing Better is a set of skills. We want to grow a skilled birthing population. We want it to be normal and natural, that when you fall pregnant, that you learn self skills, birth and birth coaching skills, and you commit to using those skills as you do the activity of birthing your baby, no matter how it is, including cesareans. Because, why? You got pregnant to have a baby, not a type of birth, right? And giving birth to your baby is an activity you do with your baby. So do it with skills. And in these next free online sessions, we hope you've learned something. And it's now 1 hour and I'm getting off. So see you later. Tell other people, please. And please support the efforts of our New Zealand NGO and purchase the resource.